Welcome to Modern Management of the Older Adult, brought to you by the Institute of Clinical Excellence. To the PT on Ice Daily Show, brought to you by the Institute of Clinical Excellence. My name is Dustin Jones, one of the older adult faculty, and today we're going to talk about protein intake and bone health. What is the evidence currently showing? What you need to know, because protein is being thrown around all over in terms of marketing, in terms of different articles and content pieces. I'm getting more questions about it from the folks that I'm serving. I'm sure you are as well. So I want to give a review of what we know to be true about protein intake related to bone health and what may not be true. All right. So the conversation of protein intake related to bone health has been, over the past 10 to 15 years, it's started to become more and more of a frequent conversation. Typically, when we think of protein intake, we think of all the benefits related to muscles, right? Muscle mass, muscle strength, function as well. And the evidence has shown that it is very useful to use in that regard. But then also starting to think about bone health in relation to osteoporosis. Bone is actually 33% of bone mass is actually comprised of protein, and protein intake is relevant for something like insulin growth factor, IGF-1, that does influence bone growth. And so there are theoretical mechanisms that intaking protein is going to influence the health of your bones and the strength of your bones. The big issue here is that most adults are malnourished, especially in this macronutrient. There are a few different studies looking in the older adult population, looking at protein intake, and are they even meeting the minimum recommended guidelines, which currently stands as 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, up to 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. And so they were observing, were people even meeting the minimum of 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, and around 50% of older adults were not meeting those. And with a lot of the folks that I work with, it seems like it's even more than that. It's pretty rare that folks are even hitting the minimum recommendations of 0.8 grams per kilogram. If you're in the US, just think 0.4 grams per pound of body weight. And so there's concerns about just the limited protein intake. And there's also concerns about, is this something that a lever that we could be pulling in the realm of osteoporosis and improving bone mineral density and hopefully reducing the risk of fracture. So in terms of protein, what do we know? We do know that increasing protein intake can influence muscle mass, size, and strength. It can be a helpful supplement to resistance training. That's the key here, is that protein alone, the benefits are not as clear. There could actually be some negative consequences to a high protein intake without physical activity and resistance training. And so we really view protein as a supplement to resistance training, and it can have amazing benefits to our clients. In the older adult population, we need to bump up what those recommended daily amounts are. And so there's some really promising research looking at folks that consume more than the recommended amount, more than the 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, or you could think of more than 0.5 grams per pound of body weight per day. And older adults will typically respond better than if they're just doing the minimum. It speaks to this concept of anabolic resistance that many older adults can experience. It just takes more of that protein, the amount of protein, to trigger some of that muscle protein synthesis to where we see some of those benefits. So older adults typically need more protein. A lot of these recommendations are for sedentary individuals. If you have someone that is training, that is active, then it's going to be bumped up to 0.8 to 1 grams per pound of body weight, which is a significant amount of protein per day. But to supplement that type of training that many of you old, not weak clinicians are going to be using, we typically recommend to go up a little bit to that 0.8 to 1 grams per pound of body weight per day. So all in all, protein, we do need to be promoting this. The evidence is pretty clear that it is beneficial, especially related to muscle mass, size, strength, and it's relatively safe. We've got the green light to be talking about protein intake related to muscles. Now, related to bones, this is where it gets kind of murky, because there are a few systematic reviews and meta-analyses that are looking at the available research of protein intake related to bone health. And we cannot make any strong claims here. A lot of the studies that are included may not have compared, resistance training and protein intake to, resistance training alone to protein alone, looking at primary outcomes of bone mineral density, for example, or bone content. A lot of the studies also are relatively short. We know that if we're going to see changes in bone mineral density, that we typically need like 6 months, 8 months to see significant changes from an intervention. And a lot of the studies are relatively short, meaning like 12 weeks of an intervention of resistance training and protein intake. And when we're looking at changes in bone, we may not have enough time to see some of those significant changes, as opposed to like strength. Yeah, 12 weeks, we can definitely be able to show changes in strength, but not necessarily in the strength of bone. There are proposed mechanisms that theoretically me bumping up my protein intake is going to influence bone mineral density. But when we researched this, it hasn't really shaken out to be very, very clear. What has become somewhat clear is that if I just consume a very, very high protein diet alone without increasing my physical activity levels, that could potentially have a negative implication on bone mineral density, where as I'm bumping up that protein intake, I can often increase my urinary calcium excretion. If I don't meet that with increasing my calcium intake, that can create an environment where bone mineral density may break down. So I think we have to be careful here in terms of bone mineral density. So what are our takeaways? What are the things that we want to continue to push when we're having this conversation? This topic is not meant to scare you away from talking about protein. In fact, I think it's even more of a reason to speak to protein. It is important. We know it's helpful. We know it can influence, muscle mass size and strength. It influences sarcopenia, especially when it is combined with resistance training. We need to view protein as a supplement to lifting heavy things, and especially related to trying to influence bone mineral density, right? We know lifting heavy things is going to be helpful. We know impact training is going to be helpful, where we increase the rate of loading of the skeletal system that can promote stronger bones. So resistance training, physical activity, that is our primary thing that we're pushing, and then we're promoting protein as a supplement. When we're working with our older adults, we want to be pushing towards the upper limits of the current recommendations. And I would say a great goal for a lot of folks would be to go above the recommended amount. If I'm a sedentary individual, I'm trying to hit over 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, or 0.5 grams per pound of body weight per day. If I'm an active individual that is participating in a fitness program or doing regular resistance training, you can flirt up with that 0.8 grams per pound of body weight to 1 gram per pound of body weight per day. So we're typically going to be recommending maybe higher than what a lot of these folks are associated with. Now, in terms of the practicality of this, of giving them this number, I think it's helpful to calculate it for them, right? Set the number. And I think it's helpful to track, to identify how much are you consuming. But tracking over a long period of time may not be sustainable or enjoyable for that person, but it can be helpful to get an idea of what they currently are doing, and then we can make recommendations. And for a period of tracking, it could be a few days, it could be a week. You will get an idea of how much protein certain foods have, right? You'll get an idea of what your typical patterns, what is resulting in terms of your protein intake. So I don't necessarily view tracking as a long-term solution, but a short-term gathering of data to really highlight the issue at hand. And it can be very eye-opening and can lead to behavior change. So tracking can be helpful. When we make the recommendations of where they can bump up their protein, I think we need to consider their current situation. What are their habits? What are they buying? It may be an easy substitution, right? Like, let's say they love yogurt, for example, but they get the super, loaded with sugar, low protein yogurt, that we could switch that over to a Greek yogurt that has a much higher protein, in terms of grams per volume. So we can make some simple switches, but we want to think about the recommendations considering their resources, and also satiation in older adults is a big issue. In terms of resources, I'm mainly talking about financial resources. Because I can make a recommendation that you need to drink a protein shake every day, right? And if they go and get a bottle, the bottled protein, that's usually going to be about double the price as a powdered protein in terms of the price per gram. Usually about double if I get a prepared bottle. So I recommend a lot of powders to make it more accessible for folks. And you can get shaker bottles super easy and can make it pretty accessible for individuals. I feel like the shakes are really helpful for folks related to satiation, because if they do bump their protein intake up with real whole natural foods, which is the priority, right? A lot of folks are gonna get to a point where they just can't consume any more food. They feel absolutely full, and so the shake can be helpful in this regard to bump up the protein. Another thing to consider is hitting a daily amount versus just supplementing with a shake. There have been some interesting studies where the intervention was just adding a protein shake, not necessarily tracking a daily amount, but just getting, 20, 40, 50 gram kind of bolus of protein through a protein shake, and seeing some positive benefits. I think based on what you find with tracking, we just need to bump it up a little bit more that a protein shake could achieve. It may be easier, simpler, and more sustainable just to say, hey, you're doing pretty well. You're pretty consistent in your protein intake based on your diet. I think all we need to do is just add a shake. It could be 40 gram, whatever it is, right? But supplementing versus always tracking and having this daily amount in your mind, just adding a shake could be more sustainable for individuals, and I think more practical for a lot of folks. But I think we can only really make that recommendation if we've actually tracked what their current habits are and we've identified a trend that they are coming up short, but it's coming up short by a typical amount, maybe 30, 40, 50 grams. A shake could kind of fill the gap, if you will. So I hope that's helpful. I've seen lots of conversations around protein and bone health, and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here, that we don't want to be making these outrageous claims that, you can take this protein shake and it's going to reverse your osteoporosis. Like, we have no evidence to support that whatsoever. But if you lift some heavy things, we implement some impact training, and you supplement with protein intake, we're going to see some pretty positive results related to muscle strength, mass, size, and we may see a change in bone mineral density. We can't say it's a protein shake. It's probably the resistance training, but it's likely not hurting and only contributing in a positive manner. All right. So we don't want to oversell the benefits, but we do want to speak to it. Hopefully you had some practical tidbits there. If you have any other recommendations, comments, when you've been implementing, trying to bump up protein intake, I'd love to hear that in the comments. Any other strategies or tactics that you use, I would love to hear that, because I've had some successful scenarios in the folks I've worked with, but also some folks that just haven't picked up on it. And I'd love to hear your all's thoughts there. All right. We'd love to see you on the road as well. I want to mention our upcoming older adult courses. So our certification, older adult certification, is comprised of our 3 courses, our 2 online courses, which is level 1, level 2, and then our live course. Our level 1, next one is coming up in March 17th. So coming up really quickly. Level 2, which you have to take level 1 before level 2. That starts May 15th. And our upcoming live courses, Jeff Musgrave is going to be down in New Orleans this weekend. March 15th, 16th, we're going to be in Sparks, Glencoe, Maryland. March 22nd and 23rd, we'll be outside of Chicago, Illinois. And then April 5th and 6th, we'll be in Longmont, Colorado. And then I'll be outside of Tampa Bay in Florida. So we're really excited about all these courses coming up. Hope to see y'all on the road. Y'all have a lovely rest of your Wednesday. Get that protein in, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to the MMOA podcast. If you found this helpful, please share with someone that could benefit. And if you're looking for more practical content to help you better serve older adults, head over to www.mmoa.online, where you can learn more about our free resources, our community, continuing education courses, and our certification. Once again, that's www.mmoa.online. Thanks for listening.